I hope everybody's as excited as I am because you're back. And my goodness, Lindsay, it is such an honor to have you back here again.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Monique.
As Mother's Day is quickly approaching, I right away thought of I would love to have Lindsay talk with us about this day or this day that's coming is the fact that it is complicated. It's complicated because those of us that are mothers, we know that we are excited. We've worked hard to try to do something different. And at the same time, a lot of us feel grief, sadness, some depression. And it's just, we're holding these two things together. So I would love to hear, some of your wisdom on this.
Well, I think what you said about it being complicated is really to the point here on this holiday because the holiday is supposed to be a time of honoring your mother. And of course, there's so much pressure to participate in that because, it is an economic juggernaut for a lot of companies, florists, cards, restaurants. I mean, it's a very important thing in our culture. So when you are not feeling like you are eager to share warm, fuzzy feelings or feelings of appreciation to a parent that maybe was difficult for you, it can leave you in a very alienated and uncomfortable place, not to mention conflicted feelings when you're standing in front of the card section in the grocery store about what to pick out that's not going to be untrue to your feelings and yet is going to somehow satisfy what you think that your mother wants from you on this particular holiday. So it is very complicated.
I think I did a little a little thing on Instagram one time where I was at a card shop trying to find a card. I opened it up and they're all like, "You're the best mother in the world. I have so many memories and thank you." And it's like, "Nope, nope, nope." And then the ones that just say nothing. Okay, that one. you know. It's really tough. It's tough. We're laughing about it, but it's a tough time. I wanted to ask you if maybe you can talk a little bit about why is it so tough for us? What is happening to us when this day approaches or as we start to come close to Mother's Day?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that happens is that this moment when you're standing in front of the card display is a moment that you've probably, and I'm speaking you in the plural here to everybody who's listening, but you've probably faced that moment millions of times with your parent where you're standing in front of them, you know that there's a certain response that's wanted from you, that's even demanded from you, and yet everything in you is not feeling that. And so you know how you should be, and you know that you don't feel that way. And yet there's an expectancy staring you in the face that says, come on and participate in this relationship with me. And then there's a moral obligation put on top of that, which is you will be a good person, a good child, if you pick out a card that makes me feel esteemed and confident about our relationship. So that's a lot for a card to carry, and that's a lot for a person to carry when maybe they have a lot of conflicted or even resentful feelings toward that parent. So one of the things that I think is important to understand is that when you just are deciding how to approach Mother's Day with a parent that is emotionally immature, it's felt to be all about the emotional needs of the parent. And here comes that old familiar feeling, that emotional loneliness feeling of what's going on inside me doesn't count. My inner world has no value in this relationship whatsoever. And it is invalidated over and over so that I can't even have a conversation about what it is that I'm really feeling and thinking. So there's this ingenuine or ungenuine quality that you may have felt forced into because you're trying to be a good person. You're trying to keep up with the culture. You're trying to keep up with your parents' expectation. And there's probably an altruistic part of your heart that truly knows in that moment you have the power to give your parents something that will be extremely meaningful to them, even if they don't act like it, even if they don't seem to be moved by it. That homage to the parent is incredibly generous from the child. And the parent really gets a lot from that in terms of their self esteem, even if they don't act like they are. So we have an altruistic part of ourself that wants, knowing we have that power, wants to give that. Okay. We do want to make them feel good. It's just that it brings up so many conflicting feelings within us that it can tie us up in a knot as we try to decide, okay, how am I going to approach this holiday with her this year?
I love that. I just hear those beautiful qualities that we have inside of us that like you said, that wants to be kind and that wants to show kindness. And I like that you're also putting into words at the same time that we want to do that, we have these feelings of emptiness, grief, sadness, and so both of those together touches me. I think that that is what we are carrying, what we are dealing with. I've had many years of Mother's Day experiences and cards and I got to a point in my journey where I finally stopped sending cards. There was a point where I felt, what about honoring the truth? What about honoring her truth? What about honoring the fact that she's sad, that she's had to pretend for all these years and celebrate, where I'm acting as if what happened really doesn't matter. We're celebrating your motherhood or how you were as a mother. And it wasn't easy and it took decades. But for me, not that it felt good, but it felt right. And we're all on a different, that was a little bit of my experience. Do I feel any better inside? A little bit for doing my truth. It's complicated.
And I think a lot of us get the message that it's our job to be who they think we should be, okay, so that they can be who they think they are. See, there's this heavy for emotionally immature people. There's this heavy substitution of appearance for substance, and this is what makes people so confused and so frustrated because on the one hand, at a superficial level, there was attention, there was caring, there was at times emotional nurturing. It just the problem is that it was happening on the parent's schedule. It was happening when the parent was, filled up with extra energy or they were feeling particularly good that day or whatever. It's
Can I
really
interrupt you for a second? Or it was their own definition of what makes a good mother.
Thank you. Absolutely. And that may be, to get to a whole nother dimension, that may be very culturally defined. And if you're an emotionally immature person, you're going to focus more on surfacey things like roles. What is your role with your child or in your family? What is your role as a person in life? And you're going to focus on, am I doing right by some sort of external criterion? And if there's sort of a cultural norm, and of course there is for all mothers, then we tend to compare ourselves to that to say, yes, I'm doing a good job, or no, I'm not. And if you happen to be comparing yourself to a maternal norm that, maybe is pretty far away from what we might consider the warm, nurturing mother, but you may nevertheless be convinced that you have done an excellent job and you can focus and report on all the things that you did for that child, the opportunities you gave them, how many times you were up with them when they were sick. I mean, and you're like checking if you're the parent, you're checking off the boxes and absolutely know that you did a good job. The problem is that they don't take into account the inner world experience of other people.
Yes.
especially of the child. There's sort of an expectation that I don't know, it's like the child is like a little bag of stimulus and response, that there's
Exactly.
no inner substance or soul to the child. They're not really a person yet. So you can sort of mold them into whoever you want, which, and as anybody who's had children knows, they come into this world with their own little personality. And, you only get a limited say so in how they're going to, what path they're going to take. So, it's very poignant when you see a parent or especially in this case, a mother who has probably tried her best, probably dealt with a lot of stress. If she's emotionally immature, she may have had very limited nurturing or very rigid kinds of upbringings herself. And in comparison, she may know in her heart she wasn't as bad as her mother, or, she wasn't as tough as her father. And so that's what really hurts them, I think, is that they feel nobody understands what I tried to give. And the problem is their intention is wonderful. I mean, that's fantastic that you're even maybe thinking about how I was for you as a kid, but it doesn't matter what your intention is when the impact is so hurtful or so depriving to your child. The intention is something, but it's not everything.
Right. So, for those daughters that are in this complicated place, do you have any suggestions of how they can manage or help themselves during this time to feel a little bit more stable or a little bit more regulated?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is don't get triggered by the sentimental cards. That's really wasted energy. It's like because the superficial sentimental cards say that your experience with your mother was very close and warm and intimate. And it probably wasn't if she was emotionally immature because she was so had to be so defended against her own emotional experiences that she probably couldn't give that to you. So, what I would say to the daughter, the adult daughter, is flick through those cards, those temptations as quickly as you can. Don't even give it a thought and find something that, you know, doesn't honor or doesn't pretend to honor a special relationship because that's not gonna work. It's so ingenuine that it would feel bad to send it, but it honors the bond. It honors the role. Like, would you have been better off with no mother at all? Maybe not. Okay. So if we start from ground zero, like, is there anything you appreciate about having had a bond with this person that was better than having no bond with anyone?
That's a tricky question. No, I hear what you're saying. Ground zero. I always say find the card with the least amount of words, like Happy Mother's Day. Have a great day.
Yes. Yes, yes, because that kind of card, or even if you wrote a note inside a card that had no message inside, that is essentially saying, I noticed the holiday, I'm honoring our bond. Thanks for getting me to this point of, having grown up to the point where I'm in a grocery store, buying my own groceries, looking at cards for you. Thank you for all of that, and that's it. That's about as far as I can go. But some people in their wherever they are in their relationship with their parent counts a lot for this. Because sometimes, maybe they're feeling so in the middle of this whole emotional turmoil about their relationship with their parent that they can't even bring themselves to do that. And I understand that. And sometimes you might have to find other ways. One of the other ways might be to not respond at all. Okay, because that's just all you can do. You could send a quick one-line email. You could send a quick text. You could not do anything at all. You could really satisfy a lot of needs on the parent's part by sending flowers or chocolates or something like that. But there are these nodal points. I mean, teenagers go through these nodal points all the time where they really can't give back to the parent because they're in the middle of their individuation process. And somehow to do anything that has the merest whiff of being conciliatory or sort of caving into what the other person wants you to be is intolerable. I mean, it would feel like, sort of a turning your back on your own identity or your own soul. And it doesn't mean that you stay in that place forever, although you might, but it means that at this point, I can't bring myself to do it. And that's something that we have to be able to give to ourselves because we're at a point where we may have to rather rigidly follow our own inner instincts in order to be congruent with our true self that we're trying to reestablish a connection with. Okay, because that connection with your core self often gets interrupted in these emotionally immature relationships because you're spending so much time taking care of the emotional needs and the self-esteem of the parent or the emotionally immature person. Yeah. So we have to, we just have to give ourselves some grace that this year, maybe we just can't be congruent and do that. But maybe next year, maybe 5 years from now, who knows? That
Mm.
it can be decided then.
I really like that, Lindsay, because you just explained, part of that healing process, uh, how every could be different. And as you said, we spent so much of our lives denying kind of our own self and focusing on what that parent might need. And we might get to a point where it's like, okay, now I have to honor or listen to what part of me is needing. And if it doesn't feel like I can pretend anymore, then maybe I'm going to follow that and see what happens. And it's scary. It's, I think, part of that kind of figuring out, okay, what feels right for me right now on this healing journey. And as you said, it can change maybe just this year, but I think this honoring ourself is a big step. Many of us have this feeling that we took when we have these kinds of relationships that somehow we're selfish to do that.
Yes, because, that's no accident because we will get the message that we're being selfish or heartless or cold or unloving, thoughtless. We get that message because for emotionally immature people who are often tend to hang out at this kind of more superficial and more role dictated level, they determine their goodness by how well they fulfill the role they've set for themselves, right? So they'll do the same to you, and you will end up feeling like maybe I'm not a person who's capable of love. Maybe I'm a person who really does have like a little frozen pea of a heart. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am so selfish and so stunted inside that I can't even show this love to my parent. But it's important when you're in that growth process to realize that you have a bond to yourself, just like you have a bond to your parent. You have an obligation to yourself, first and foremost, before any obligation to anyone else, because your survival is what enables you to be here, to be responding to any of this. I mean, you have to start with yourself. And people, like we just said earlier, people have to be willing to sometimes take a stand. And maybe it's as small as not making contact on Mother's Day, but it's something that says, I can do nothing else. I can do no other thing but to not respond on this holiday or to not call or whatever it is. And that becomes a moment, a terrifying moment oftentimes for people because not only are they afraid to lose the relationship, but they're afraid that really they will have cinched it, that they really are heartless and cold. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so most people are very uncomfortable and don't want to run the risk of that. I
Mhm.
will say that if you are a kind of a more people pleasing person, if you like to get along with people, if you tend to be very empathic and kind hearted, that kind of thing, I don't see anything wrong with sending a card or sending a text, something that doesn't pull any energy out of your heart. Okay. You're not getting on the phone for a half hour conversation. You're not going to visit. But I don't see anything wrong with doing things that sort of make you feel better about it. You're managing the distance, sending a card instead of calling, but I don't wanna hurt my mom, or I don't want her to think that she's unloved because I know this stuff is so important to her. She doesn't understand. So I may do something just because it's easier to do it that way than it would be to hold that stand that I'm not going to give anything at this moment beyond what I can manage for myself. So, I mean, I just don't think there's a right or a wrong answer about it in terms of what's your healthy path going to be. Because I figure it's fine to be insincere or ungenuine with somebody who has been invalidating to you. I don't see a problem with that at
Mhm.
all. If it's expedient, if it makes things better, if it makes it easier to do a little bit, I wouldn't fault myself for that as, in a kind of tourist way, that I didn't be totally brutally honest all the time and not show any affection because that would be, stepping down from my position. No, all the time in our society, we're being nicer to people than we really feel. Okay? I mean, that's how it works. Yeah, I just wanna tell people, don't fault yourself for what you find necessary to do. As long as you're staying in contact with your true self and you're aware of your true feelings, that's all I care about as a therapist. That's doing it right there. How nice or how, um, how much you keep your boundaries,
Mhm.
that's a stylistic difference.
Yes.
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you're talking about is really helpful because let's name it. You're telling people that they have choice. Whereas without that word, they might think I don't have choice, but you do have choice in how you're going to do it. I'm bringing myself in just as an example for people in that there was a time where for me, it went from visiting and seeing and spending time with to the flowers. And that didn't feel like I was denying myself because I gave flowers, which celebrates Mother's Day. It felt like um, I was doing something good, maintaining sort of a relationship at distance. And, she was receiving these lovely flowers and I felt okay. And then it got to another place. And I think that that's just, it's okay. It's part of the work that we're doing around ourselves. So I love what you shared. The other piece I just want to say is I want to really find sometimes with this whole mess that we can forget the hard work that a lot of daughters who grew up with unavailable or emotionally immature mothers, how hard they've worked with their own children to try to make it different, to try to create a connection. And that we don't want to forget when we get caught up in the mess that you do deserve to be honored for that. That's really incredible. Do you want to say something about that?
I sure do. Because what I just thought of was we ought to be shopping for a Mother's Day card for ourselves.
Oh my goodness, Lindsay. Yes.
You know?
I'll send myself flowers and balloons. I'll open the door. I'll receive them and go,
Well, better even than that would be to find the card that you wish somebody was sending you. Okay. And in that card, write about what it is that you've done right as a parent and what you've been trying to do, and that you noticed that you yourself were trying to be this kind of parent, or that it was so hard at times that you thought you were going to lose your mind, and yet you still wanted to give your child more than you got yourself. And writing that Mother's Day card and putting it in the mail, okay, is such a validation of what you need to hear. And what better person to give that to you is you. So tell you a little personal story. My son was about probably 14 to 18 months old. He was just starting to get going on his, like,
Walking.
when they take over the world. He was hard. He was so active. And I had a friend come over and she was just a neighbor friend. And she said something about the dining room table, or I can't remember what she was saying, but I was so hungry for validation of my parenting that I heard this whole thing she was saying about something that was probably unrelated as a sort of a validation of what a good job I was doing as a mother. And it was almost like a little hallucination, you know? And so I'm listening to it, my heart is blooming. I'm thinking, "Oh my god, I can't believe she saw that in me. I've been trying to do that with this kid. I worked so hard." And then she said something else, it's like, "She's not talking about me."
Oh,
And it was like what I got from that was, "Man, I am starving. I am starving for
yes.
somebody to understand that I am giving this child more than I ever got, and out of these empty tanks is coming this wonderful little boy who, through sheer effort and sheer love, is getting, I feel, the best of what he deserves." And that was such an education, and it wasn't that I didn't have support. I had a wonderful husband, I had a wonderful sister. I mean, I had people that were there to support me, but I don't think I felt that anybody really understood what it was taking out of me, the effort. And so it led to this little hallucinogenic moment where I took what I needed from
I
an
just think that's
unrelated conversation.
I think it's beautiful, and it's making me think if you have a good group of girlfriends or friends, imagine if you could send each other cards for what you see. That would just feed
Yes,
us, light us up. The
yes.
impact is amazing, which is so good because I feel like we're not going to necessarily get what we're looking for from our caregiver, but we certainly can get it from a neighbor,
Mhm.
from our hallucinations. No, I'm kidding.
No, I'm serious. It worked.
From, we can get it from others and it can feed us. And that's the important part.
Like,
I just love that. And I love what you said about sending yourself a card, whether you send yourself a card or whether you write yourself in your journal something. But the idea is I want those that are listening that are in this place of I feel this towards my own caregiver and I've got grief and I'm really working hard to break the generational trauma and to create a connection. I want you to know that you're seen and you're known and we honor you. Like I honor you. Lindsay honors you. You're changing this pattern. And my goodness is what I have to say. Plus a hug.
yes.
I just think it's amazing.
Yeah, and that would be a good way to start your card. I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing for your child. Here's what I've seen. Here's what I've noticed.
Oh my goodness.
The woman who did, dialectical behavior therapy, Marsha Linehan,
Yes.
okay? She has in her 2nd edition of her master work, she has a whole thing, a sort of an introductory chapter, and she talks about the importance of validation for the child. I never realized that, I always see her as sort of an exercise oriented and, very cut and dried sort of methodical person. But that first chapter, a friend turned me on to that just this year. But in that first chapter, she talks about how the child needs the validation that they are valuable and loved and all of that for who they are. Because if the parent doesn't feel that way about them, their survival is at stake. Very, very basic kind of need. Okay. And so I think it's so interesting to think of how important that validation is of your true nature and your true intentions. And that's why I'm saying that maybe part of the problem with sending your mom a card is that you're not doing that for yourself. Maybe it's hard to give something to her that's validating when you maybe haven't done that first step of thoroughly validating yourself to yourself, you know?
Really good point.
Because if you do that piece of your work on reconnecting to yourself through that validation process, sending a card to your mom, that's like froth on top of the wave. It doesn't have any more meaning than a nice thing to do. But if you haven't done that for yourself, it has a lot of meaning. Like you're, again, giving something to her that you didn't get yourself, and you're pulling it out of your own, give her more of something that doesn't seem to make that much difference to her anyway, unless you don't do exactly what she wants, in which case you might hear about it. But the other thing is that emotionally immature parents have a very poor receptive capacity. And by that, I mean they have a hard time taking in the good stuff that, because it's emotionally intimate.
Can you explain that a little bit? Because I saw an experience of that recently and I didn't understand it.
You want to give the example, and then we'll
Well,
explain.
just there was a piece of really, really positive, joyful news, and there was no response, which was odd.
Yeah. So joyful news told to someone raises the specter of emotional intimacy because joy begets joy, just like fear, hate begets the same. Okay. Joy pulls that person toward you to participate in the joy with you. Okay. It should be a meeting, a moment of emotional intimacy, and it feels very involuntary. When someone comes toward you in joy, you respond to it. That terrifies emotionally immature people. They cannot handle it because their sense of self is so poorly developed that those kinds of deep, all consuming emotions destabilize them. Okay, now we think, oh, it would only just destabilize them if I cursed them out, said something critical, or no, it can be great stuff. But when it gets really into the core of them, it becomes destabilizing. And that's what I mean by a poor receptive capacity. They can't take it in and use it to nurture themselves or to feel good about it. Now, I, in my story, had the opposite problem. I was so eager to take it in, I made something up. But for the emotionally immature parent, they they have to kick it out as soon as it starts to come in because it's too destabilizing.
See, Lindsay, I've seen that with bad stuff, like not being able to attend to your emotions. Let's say you fall apart, or let's say you're crying, not being able to meet you. And then you tell yourself it's because they don't have the capacity. But I've never experienced it with something good. So it's very interesting
Yeah,
hearing you talk about joy.
it's the intensity. And
How?
it's the intimacy. That's the key. That could be good, bad, doesn't matter. It's that place of intensity and realness that
Wow.
gets them.
Wow. I just learned something really new and interesting. Wow. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and it makes it so confusing because, of course, you
Yes.
would think, well, it was the content of what I told her, which was negative or, hard to hear. What that's what did it. That's why she turned away. It wouldn't occur to you it was the intensity and the realness of it, kind of separate from content. But I think that's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I do have one last question. I'm very curious because this is your specialty. You work with a lot of people who have these kinds of relationships. What is one thing besides writing yourself a card that in general people can do to start to get to connect? How do they get to know that self you're talking about? What's one thing they can do?
Yeah, I would say it's to pause and just ask yourself, what am I really feeling at this moment? Because when you're with an emotionally immature person, if you grew up with that kind of family dynamic, you are expected to very quickly respond with what it is that they need from you. And if you're at all sensitive and empathic, you mirror that, you learn that very quickly, and you learn to give a response that isn't honest, that isn't true, because that's what's being asked of you. You're supposed to mirror them. So that pause where you just practice taking 20 seconds just to reconnect with the self so that you're coming from the self instead of this sort of leftover patterning of quick behavior for an impatient parent that wants an answer or a response now. To take that time to ask yourself, what is it that I'm feeling right now? What am I feeling in my body? Do I like this? Do I want this? And it doesn't mean that you have to be able to take action on that. Okay. I mean, it could be that somebody asked you something and you get a feeling like, I don't want to do that. You may ultimately decide to agree to do it because you're not ready to say no. That's okay. It's part of the process. But the first step has to be that you tune in to what your body is telling you about the reality of your reaction in that moment. That's the beginning of it, and it is in the body. It's not a thought. It's it's a knot in the stomach, it's a tension in the throat, it's a heaviness in the heart. And as we reconnect with that, it's so interesting from brain neurology standpoint. When we reconnect with those feelings, those very body feelings are where we get our original sense of self as babies. Same part of the brain. So we're going back to the part of the brain which is very hooked in with the body to re-feel what we've been trained to tune out.
Yeah.
And that is the biggest thing.
Really helpful.
I was listening to a podcast recently and they were saying that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she was addressing, I think it was the Supreme Court, they would say, Mrs. Ginsburg, whatever, and she would not say anything for a long time. It was her time to speak at the trial, right? And she wouldn't say anything. And then the recording, after a while, the judge says, Mrs. Ginsburg, and then there's still a silence, and you're like, what is she doing? And then she speaks. And it's like you can hear in her voice that she is so present and so on what she is about to say. And I think she wasn't gathering her thoughts. I think she was reconnecting with herself in a very anxiety provoking situation, potentially, and waited until she knew she could speak out of that place where she was reconnected with what she really felt and believed about the subject. So we can all take a page from her. We don't have to answer right away. We can take that moment to reconnect.
I love that. I think we're so used to the automatic fast, whether that's because we've got survival energy going on during that time, but just the pause and knowing why we're pausing.
And knowing why we're pausing.
Yes.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I always used to hear the thing, take the pause, notice the pause, do the pause, but so that we can reconnect with what am I feeling right now in my body? Connecting with that. I think that's a great tip.
Yeah. And the connecting with your body, I just want to reinforce this, is a step in reconnecting with the self. So it's not just that we want to be in touch with our anxiety or we want to be in touch with our feeling in our heart. We want to know that that is a message from our deepest self. So the in touch with your own emotion will take you back to your true self, which is trying to tell you something about the situation. And when you go back and say, I'm listening, I can hear you, I'm with you, I'm going to operate out of you now, not out of my mind or my fear of other people's impatience, but I'm going to operate out of you. You can feel yourself coming back together.
That's great. So that is a to do, to practice, to try.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Lindsay, thank you so much for being here today and sharing with us. It's always such a joy and so helpful. And I appreciate you and your work so much.
Well, thank you so much. I've always loved talking to you. We seem to get into the most interesting discussions.